should have trusted my instincts the first time it happened. A few months ago, after having tea at Vanessa's, I spent the night curled up in pain, my stomach twisting in ways I'd never experienced before. The doctors called it food poisoning, but something about it never felt right. It wasn't the first time either. There had been other moments, subtle, easy to dismiss. A mild allergic reaction after a meal Vanessa prepared, a stomach ache after an evening at their house. Little things, small enough to brush off, but together they painted a picture I had been too blind to see. This morning, as I stepped into Vanessa's townhouse for our usual Sunday brunch, the feeling hit me stronger than ever. The place was pristine, as always, with its marble countertops and oversized windows letting in the morning light. The table was already set, a picture of effortless elegance, but I wasn't fooled. There was something unnatural about it all, something too carefully arranged. Nathan greeted me with a warm smile, but his eyes didn't match. He was seated at the head of the table, Vanessa beside him, effortlessly composed as she sipped from a champagne flute. Everything about her was polished. Her perfectly styled hair, the expensive emerald blouse, the way she held herself with a confidence that never faltered. I slid into my chair, my fingers grazing the edge of the linen napkin, and that's when I noticed it. A steaming cup of coffee placed neatly in front of me. My stomach clenched. Nathan nudged it closer, his voice light. The scent hit me almost instantly, familiar yet wrong. There was an underlying bitterness to it, something metallic. The memory of that night of sickness clawed its way back to me, and suddenly I knew. Vanessa watched me over the rim of her glass, her expression unreadable. I had seen that look before, the way she always seemed to be waiting, anticipating something. Nathan was the same, a little too eager, a little too insistent. I lifted the cup just slightly, pretending to examine it. My pulse hammered as my mind raced. I had two choices, confront them now or play along. My gut told me to wait. I forced a smile and reached for the butter dish, deliberately knocking over the silverware. A quiet clatter filled the space, and I sighed, leaning down to retrieve them. My hand moved swiftly, almost without thought. In one smooth. By the time I straightened, Vanessa was already speaking. Something about Nathan's new obsession with perfecting his coffee-making skills. I barely heard her. My focus was on the cup in her hand, the way she lifted it to her lips without hesitation. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding tightened in my chest. She took a sip. The moment stretched, silent except for the quiet hum of conversation from the rest of the house. I kept my expression neutral, waiting. Then it happened. Her fingers trembled ever so slightly. She set the cup down, blinking. A slow, creeping pallor spread across her face. I recognized that look. I had seen it in my own reflection before. Nathan's gaze snapped toward her, his expression shifting from casual to alert in an instant. His grip tightened on the table's edge. The glance they exchanged was brief but undeniable. I sat back, my own cup untouched, and watched. The game had changed, and this time I was in control. Vanessa's hand trembled as she set the cup down, her fingers barely gripping the porcelain. A subtle shift in her posture signaled the first sign of distress, a flicker of discomfort that deepened into something more alarming. She blinked rapidly, as though trying to clear her vision, and for a brief moment, confusion clouded her usually composed features. Her breathing grew shallow, uneven, her skin paling as a shudder ran through her body. Nathan's fork clattered against his plate as he noticed the change in her. His body stiffened, his chair scraping against the floor as he sat upright, his gaze darting from Vanessa to the cup in front of her. His movements were sharp, forced, betraying the calm demeanor he was attempting to maintain. Vanessa pressed a shaking hand to her temple, exhaling through parted lips, but the sound was weak, unsteady. The moment stretched, thick with tension, a silent exchange between them, passing unnoticed by the rest of the room. Seconds later, Vanessa's body lurched forward, her hand grasping the tablecloth as she tried to steady herself. A deep tremor overtook her frame, making her grip falter, her fingers slipping uselessly against the polished wood. She gasped, a ragged breath that barely made it past her lips, her body twisting slightly as she fought to regain control. The color had drained completely from her face, her pupils dilated, her jaw tightening in a grimace of pain. Nathan shot up from his chair, the sudden motion knocking it backward. The loud clatter echoed in the dining room, drawing startled glances from the others seated around the table. His movements were frantic, his breathing quickening, as his hands hovered in the air, unsure whether to reach for her or pull away. Vanessa swayed, her limbs trembling, her body struggling to keep upright. Every breath she took was labored, her chest rising and falling in uneven spurts as she clenched her fists. Her gaze shifted toward Olivia, sharp and filled with realization. The pieces were fitting together in her mind, the sequence of events unraveling as her own body betrayed her. Her lips parted slightly, an attempt to form words, but the effort took too much from her. Her body spasmed again, the tremors intensifying, her hands shaking uncontrollably as the poison worked its way through her system. Nathan's eyes flickered wildly between Vanessa and Olivia, his expression morphing from confusion to horror. His mind was racing, struggling to piece together what had gone wrong. The moment of hesitation gave Olivia just enough time to step forward, her phone already lifted, its screen glowing as the video recording continued. The evidence was captured, every glance, every reaction preserved, ensuring there would be no denying the truth. Vanessa let out a strained exhale, her breath shaky, as she fought against the growing weakness in her limbs. Her body betrayed her further, her muscles no longer responding to her attempts to move. It was clear now that the effects were worsening by the second, the poison coursing through her bloodstream, overwhelming her system faster than she had anticipated. A fresh wave of panic washed over her features as the reality of her condition set in. The paramedics arrived within minutes, the sharp sound of their hurried footsteps filling the space. The tension in the room grew heavier as they assessed Vanessa's condition, their voices clipped and professional as they worked. Gloved hands moved swiftly, checking her pulse, adjusting her position, ensuring she remained stable. Olivia remained still, her face unreadable, her gaze locked onto the scene before her, as Vanessa's body was lifted onto the stretcher. Her trembling fingers curled against the fabric of the blanket draped over her. Her movements were weak, almost involuntary, her body surrendering to the effects of the poison. Her eyes fluttered, glassy and unfocused, her breathing still unsteady as the paramedics wheeled her toward the exit. Nathan remained frozen, his expression unreadable, though his clenched fists and rigid stance betrayed his emotions. The weight of the moment pressed against Olivia's chest, but there was no satisfaction in watching the plan unravel before them. There was only a quiet understanding, a realization that the truth had surfaced in a way neither Nathan nor Vanessa had anticipated. The events had unfolded before their very eyes, the evidence undeniable, the consequences inevitable. The low hum of voices and the shuffle of movement filled the space as the paramedics guided Vanessa toward the ambulance outside. Olivia took one last glance at Nathan, watching as his carefully maintained composure cracked further with each passing second. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw tight, his mind still struggling to grasp the extent of what had just transpired. The pieces had fallen into place, and there was no going back. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and linoleum, the air thick with the hum of machines, and the low murmur of medical staff moving swiftly through the corridors. Olivia stood just outside Vanessa's room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she watched the chaos unfold through the glass panel in the door. Doctors hovered over her sister-in-law, their voices urgent but controlled as they relayed toxicology results and administered stabilizing treatments. The poison had done its work, but it hadn't been enough to kill her. She should have felt relieved. Instead, a cold, simmering rage settled in her bones. Her phone vibrated in her palm, another message from her lawyer, confirming that the evidence had been backed up securely. She barely registered it as she flicked through the files on her screen, scanning through the screenshots of text messages between Nathan and Vanessa. Their words were damning, discussions of dosage, careful planning, complaints about how Olivia had resiliently pushed through her previous illnesses. A soft chime from the elevator pulled her attention. Nathan stepped out, his shoulders squared, his expression a carefully crafted mask of concern. He spotted her immediately, quickening his pace, slipping into the role of the worried husband with practiced ease. His brow furrowed as he approached, his hands reaching for hers, but she didn't move. She didn't flinch. He hesitated for only a second before sighing dramatically, shaking his head like this was all just an unfortunate misunderstanding. His voice was low, calm, the same way he had spoken to her during all those nights she had spent doubled over in pain, convincing her that she was simply sick, just unlucky. He told her that she was overreacting, that Vanessa must have had a bad reaction to something else. He tried to plant doubt, to make her second-guess what she had witnessed, what she knew to be true. Olivia let him talk. She let him spin his version of reality, let him tell her how much he loved her, how much he wanted to protect her. She let him get comfortable in his lies before she finally moved. She reached into her bag and pulled out the printed copies of the texts. His texts. The ones where he discussed the plan, the ones where he detailed how much of the substance to use, the ones where he mocked her for being so trusting. She watched as his face shifted, the slow realization creeping over him like a shadow. But she wasn't finished. With steady hands, she tapped on her phone and pulled up another file, security footage from Vanessa's townhouse. It was grainy, but clear enough to show Nathan in the kitchen, mixing something into Olivia's tea the last time she had been there. There was no explanation he could give, no excuse that would make sense. His mask cracked then, a muscle in his jaw ticked, his hand clenching at his sides. He looked at the papers again, as if willing them to disappear. His breathing turned shallow, and for the first time since this all began, Olivia saw it, the fear. He was calculating, searching for an escape, for a way to turn this around. But there was no way out. A voice cut through the tension, firm and authoritative. Detective Ramirez. The officer had arrived moments earlier, standing just far enough to observe, but not interrupt. Now, stepping forward, he called Nathan by name, asked if he had anything to say for himself. Nathan shook his head, still trying to regain control of the situation. But Olivia could see the way his fingers twitched. He was unraveling. Ramirez wasn't interested in games. He gestured for Olivia to hand over the documents, taking them with a nod before signaling to the two officers standing near the nurse's station. The air shifted, thickening with something Olivia couldn't quite name. Then, in a single, reckless move, Nathan turned. It was fast. Too fast. He pivoted, breaking into a sprint down the hallway, dodging past a startled nurse, his shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Gasps rang out as he shoved through a set of double doors, disappearing into the stairwell. But Olivia had expected this. Her fingers curled around her phone, watching as Ramirez signaled his officers, watching as they moved in unison, tracking Nathan's movements through the security feed. Downstairs, the parking garage was dimly lit, the fluorescent bulbs flickering overhead. Nathan moved quickly, weaving between parked cars, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His plan was clear: get to his car, get out of the city, disappear before anyone could stop him. A sudden noise behind him made him whip around. An officer was closing in, steps sure and steady. Nathan hesitated for only a second before lunging, his body colliding hard with the officer's as he tried to break free. A struggle erupted, their movements frantic, the scuffle echoing off the concrete walls. Nathan threw a wild punch, his desperation overtaking any sense of logic. But it was too late. A second officer tackled him, bringing him down hard onto the pavement. The fight drained from him almost immediately, replaced by the crushing weight of defeat. Ramirez arrived moments later, stepping into the harsh glow of the overhead lights as Nathan was hauled to his feet, his hands wrenched behind his back. The sound of handcuffs clicking into place was deafening. Olivia watched from the entrance of the garage, her pulse steady, her expression unreadable. Nathan's head lifted, his gaze locking onto hers. For the first time in years, she saw him for what he really was. Not a husband, not a man she had once loved, just a coward who had finally run out of ways to escape. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with murmurs from the gallery and the rhythmic tapping of reporters' keyboards. The case had drawn national attention, a scandal that stretched far beyond personal betrayal and into the corporate world. Nathan had once been admired, a sharp businessman, a man who moved in elite circles, someone who seemed untouchable. Now he sat at the defendant's table, his once pristine suit wrinkled, his expression unreadable. The weight of the trial hung over him, each revelation another nail in the coffin he had built for himself. The prosecution wasted no time dismantling his carefully crafted image. They began with the most damning piece of evidence, Vanessa's recorded confession. Played over the silent courtroom, her voice echoed through the speakers, raw with pain and desperation. It painted an undeniable picture. The poisoning had been deliberate, calculated, months in the making. The jurors listened intently, their faces betraying their growing disgust. There was no mistaking Vanessa's words, no room for misinterpretation. She had been complicit, yes, but she had also been a pawn in Nathan's bigger plan. Then came the financial records, spreadsheets and bank statements displayed on the monitors. Nathan had meticulously siphoned money from their joint accounts, preparing for a future where Olivia would be too weak, too sick, too incapable to notice. Transfers to private offshore accounts, sudden liquidations of assets, all lining up with the timeline of her mysterious illnesses. It was no longer just attempted murder. It was premeditated theft on a level that made even the most seasoned business executives in the audience flinch. The hospital reports followed, documenting months of unexplained symptoms. The toxicology findings confirmed the presence of synthetic compounds that had no business being in a person's system. The slow poisoning had been methodical, precise. Olivia had suffered, had endured, while Nathan had watched, waiting for her to become vulnerable enough for him to strike. Nathan's defense unraveled quickly. He attempted to shift the blame entirely onto Vanessa, claiming she had acted alone, that he had been unaware of her plans, but the prosecution was ready. They pulled up the messages, the planning, the evidence that he had directed her every move. When questioned, Vanessa didn't hesitate. She turned on him in an instant, her desperation to save herself outweighing whatever loyalty she had once held. She recounted every conversation, every instance in which Nathan reassured her that Olivia wouldn't die, just weaken, just enough for them to take control. She revealed the full extent of the scheme, how Nathan had envisioned Olivia bedridden, unable to contest his power over their shared fortune. Vanessa became the prosecution's strongest weapon, her testimony weaving the final strands of the case together. The closing arguments were brutal. The prosecution painted Nathan as a man who had not only betrayed his wife, but had done so with chilling precision, orchestrating her downfall while maintaining the facade of a loving husband. They made it clear that this was never just about getting rid of Olivia, it was about controlling her entirely. They reminded the jury that if Vanessa had never accidentally consumed the poison, Olivia might still be sitting in that courtroom, unaware of just how close she had come to losing everything. The defense tried to appeal to logic, to create doubt, but there was none left to be had. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies airtight. Nathan sat motionless as the jury deliberated, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. When the verdict was read, there was no surprise. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, fraud, financial exploitation. The judge wasted no time in sentencing, 25 years, with no possibility of early parole. The weight of it settled onto Nathan's shoulders, his mask of confidence finally crumbling. Olivia watched it all unfold with a quiet calm. She had long since let go of anger, of grief. This was justice. This was closure. News outlets exploded with headlines detailing the trial's outcome. Nathan's name now forever attached to scandal and disgrace. His company swiftly cut ties, issuing statements denouncing his actions. His former colleagues distanced themselves, ensuring that his reputation was beyond salvageable. The man who once commanded power now had nothing. As he was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, Olivia didn't look away. There had been a time when she might have pitied him, but not anymore. This was his doing. His choices had led him here, and she was finally free. The stage lights glowed softly, casting a golden hue over the vast conference hall. Olivia stood at the podium, looking out at the hundreds of faces gathered before her. Business executives, industry leaders, and aspiring entrepreneurs filled the room, waiting for her to speak. It had been a long road to this moment, but she was exactly where she was meant to be. A year had passed since the trial, since the weight of betrayal had lifted from her shoulders. She had spent those months rebuilding. Not just her career, but herself. The storm Nathan and Vanessa had tried to create had not broken her. Instead, it had refined her, sharpening her instincts and making her stronger than ever. She had taken back control of her company, securing the biggest client deal of her life, the very one Vanessa had once tried to steal. It had been poetic in a way, walking into that final negotiation and signing her name to the contract, ensuring that all of Vanessa's scheming had been for nothing. But Olivia hadn't stopped there. She had founded an organization dedicated to empowering women in business, offering mentorship, legal resources, and protection against the kind of corporate sabotage she had nearly fallen victim to. The foundation had gained traction quickly, attracting high-profile sponsors and making a real impact. Nathan and Vanessa's names had faded from relevance, their once powerful presence reduced to mere whispers in the business world. Nathan had appealed his conviction twice, and twice he had been denied. The last attempt had barely made the news, overshadowed by more pressing stories. Vanessa had served her reduced sentence quietly, her former connections severed, her career prospects non-existent. Olivia barely thought of them anymore. Their downfall had once consumed her, but now they were nothing more than footnotes in her story. She had won, not through vengeance, but by proving that she had never needed them to begin with. As she wrapped up her speech, the audience erupted into applause. She stepped down from the podium, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries as she made her way toward the exit. Outside, the afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the city skyline. A breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee from a nearby cafe, and she let herself enjoy the small moment of peace. As she walked past a newsstand, a headline caught her eye. Nathan's appeal denied again. The article was buried beneath more pressing news. Just another reminder that his influence had disappeared. Once this kind of story would have consumed her, but now she barely felt anything at all. Her phone buzzed in her hand, an email. She glanced down, recognizing Nathan's name instantly. A last desperate attempt at contact. He had nothing left, no money, no power, no future. And yet he still clung to the hope that she might listen. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. With a soft smile, she pressed delete, slipping her phone back into her pocket. The best revenge was not getting even. It was living a life they could only dream of. Olivia's story is a powerful reminder that betrayal often comes from those closest to us. And in today's world, the same dangers exist. Whether in personal relationships or professional settings, people may manipulate, deceive, or even sabotage others for personal gain, just as Nathan and Vanessa did to Olivia. The key lesson here is awareness, preparation, and resilience. In modern life, trust should never be blind. Whether in business or personal matters, document everything. Keep records of financial transactions, conversations, and agreements. If something feels off, listen to your instincts. Olivia sensed something was wrong long before the truth surfaced, but she waited until she had solid evidence before taking action. This is a critical lesson. Patience and strategy win over emotional reactions. Additionally, her story emphasizes the power of self-reinvention. When betrayed, it's easy to let anger consume you, but true victory is thriving despite the betrayal. Instead of seeking revenge, focus on growth, success, and building a life that makes you untouchable. In today's fast-paced world, people will try to take advantage of you. The best way to protect yourself: stay informed, stay strong, and never let anyone else define your worth. If Olivia's story taught us anything, it's that strength isn't just about surviving betrayal. It's about rising above it and building a life no one can take from you. In a world full of hidden agendas and unexpected betrayals, your greatest power is knowing your worth and never letting anyone dim your light. If you love stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, stories of resilience, justice, and ultimate redemption, then you belong here. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story, it might just change the way you see the world.